Before the Europeans first landed in India, there was a kingdom that was ruled there and was a Muslim empire. It was the empire of Bengal, the Bengal Sultanate. Prior to this, there were other people who ruled. But first, let's talk about this date, May 20, 1498. That's when the first Europeans landed in India. Before this day, every other race in the old world had reached India and had basically cemented themselves in these regions. Now, Bengal is just at the far side of India, meaning that anyone who went this far could probably easily know about any other place in the east. So we're talking about Korea, we're talking about Japan, China, and all the other places. But the people I'm going to talk about would definitely know about them because they were in charge. This was the time that the Abyssinians would be in charge of a Indian majority region, putting in place their own people in high positions and making it easy for themselves to remain in power, dynasty after, well, king after king after king. Though their rule didn't last that long, it still shows how cemented or how infused the Abyssinians were at this time with the Indian continent. And remember, this is before any Europeans had ever landed in India, at least in any significant way. They had heard about it. They had gotten messages. They had seen all kinds of people who were talking about the spices and the silks and all of that. But then to land there and have significant contributions to the subcontinent, that was not going to happen, not for a while. But Abyssinians, on the other hand, not only played a small role, but played a large role. And like I said, they played administrative positions in several different ways. At one point, being a chain. So before the Sultanate of Bengal, there was three kingdoms that were fighting for power: the Gauda Empire, the Pala Empire, and the Sena Empire. These empires, the Pala being the biggest, are something of great interest, but we shouldn't speak about them today because they have a long history and they were native, meaning that they were people who already were in this region. So the Abyssinians and the Persians who would take over were definitely not native. Now, how Persian was this empire? Well, consider this: Persian was considered the official language of this, this colony of Persia. So they were definitely the biggest controller. And in fact, the people who came before the Abyssinians were Persians, and the people who came after them were also Persians. It is quite the interesting story. So, what do we have? We have names, we have last names, not clues. We're not going to show you a giraffe. I'm not going to show you, a llama. I'm not going to show you some animal and say, there we go. I'm talking about a real person. For example, Shahzada Barbark. Shahzada Barbark was known by his regional title as Ghiyasuddin Barbark Shah, and he took over the kingdom of Bengal after a Persian. He got rid of the Persian by getting rid of him, sending him to heaven, and he decided that it was his time to rule, as someone who was in a position to rule. So during the reign of Jaluluddin Fateh Shah of the Bengal Muslim Ilyas Shahi dynasty, some Abyssinian eunuch slaves ended up in important and influential positions in the royal court, many as pikes. Barbark was a eunuch and was one of the increasingly powerful of the Abyssinian palace guards. Eventually being promoted to commander of the palace guards, he led a rebellion against Sultan Fateh Shah and killed him. Shahzada Barbark took power in 1487 and started what was to become a Habshi dynasty of rulers in Bengal. He assumed the title Shahzada. Few coins have been discovered bearing his name. His reign was short-lived, being murdered by another Abyssinian. The Abyssinian who took him out was Malik Andil Habshi. His one is a little on the nose because Habshi is in his name. Better known as his regional title, Saifuddin Firuz Shah, a Habshi. Andil was an army commander of the Ilis Shahi dynasty who seized power after killing the rebel Sultan Barbak Shah II. In 1487, after claiming the throne, he styled himself as Saifuddin Firuz Shah. It is said that Andal was a eunuch. Now, we're not sure about that. He is often considered as the real founder of the Habshi rule in Bengal, as the previous Shahzada Barbark only ruled for a few months, which is probably not fair. I mean, he did start it. This is reinforced in an inscription found in Gar Jaripa in Sri Bardi Sherpa, where he ordered the construction of someone's tomb and referred to himself as Sultan al Ahad, the first sultan. The four corners of the specific tomb each bore the names of Rashidun caliphs, and the inscription sent blessings upon the Islamic prophet Muhammad, his daughter Fatima, and her two sons, Hassan and Hussein. This inscription now can be found in the Indian Museum Kolkata. Firuz Shah minted coins during his reign, which mentions the historical town of Mahmudabad. Now, we could talk about this guy because he is, I mean, you can see there that building, the Firoz Minar in Goada. He is known as a great builder. Like, he erected giant buildings that are still there today in that region. The next one is Mahmud Shah, a adopted son, because obviously the previous one was probably a eunuch, an adopted son of the previous sultan, and he ruled for a while as well. Now, there's no information about him on Wikipedia because the geniuses of Wikipedia put in a different Mahmud Shah who is from the 1300s. But after Mahmud Shah, there is Sidi Badr. Now, Sidi is obviously the name of what they call black people in, the Indian regions. So Sidi Badr was a born to a Muslim family of Habshi descent intending to take over Bengal. He first killed Habash Khan, the regent of the young Sultan Mahmud Shah II, before proceeding to also kill the Sultan Badr, ascending the throne under the title of Shams. He developed an army of 40,000 soldiers, recruiting thousands of Afghans and 5,000 Abyssinians. In 896 AH or 1490 AD, he constructed a mosque in Gangarampur adjacent to the Dargah of Makdum Maulani, Maulana Atta on 30 December 1492. His governor, Khurshid Khan, established a Jama mosque near Nawabganj on the banks of the Mahananda River. He defeated the Kamata kingdom in the battle and conquered their territory in the year 898 AH, and subsequently issued coins bearing Kamata Mandam 898. On the 2nd July 1493, the Sultan constructed a building near Dargah of Nur Qutub Alam in Hazrat Pandua. His wazir, chief minister Sayyid Hussein led a rebellion in which he was killed. Hussein succeeded as the Sultan in 1498, assuming the name Alauddin Hussein Shah, and founded the Husayinid Shahi dynasty of Bengal. He also removed all Habshis from administrative posts, ending the Habshi rule. Now you can see how formidable and how straight up these Habshis were. A lot of them were slaves given the chance to rise, and they rose pretty well. I mean, talk about using merit over anything else. They just worked their way up to the top, and when they got there, they did what they had to do. Now, obviously, one thing that we could say why this dynasty didn't last that long, it was barely stable. You could not call it stable. Every single king in that list got assassinated. If you notice that, every single one of them got assassinated. But what do we expect when we're talking about people who, in their own way, were just a bunch of military men who were put in positions where, I mean, you start off as a bitter slave, you're then put in a higher position, and now you're in a position where you could control the nation. I don't think you're gonna be, well adjusted. Also, they took your, family jewels. You're not exactly gonna be the most well adjusted human being. Now, as kings, they contributed a lot. Now, remember, contribution of a king doesn't just come in, oh, I just control the region for a short while. They erected buildings that are still there and are known by people, historians, that they were made by Abyssinians. Keep in mind the time, the date of these people. I mean, the last one who was in charge was pretty much at close to when the Europeans were going to come to India. We're talking about a very long time ago here. We're talking about, I mean, if you take, the year 2000 as the starting point, we're talking about 600 years before that. We're talking about the 1400s. By the way, I hope you guys are counting how many Abyssinian rulers I've talked about in India. So, just to give you a clue, we've got that dome with the Zanj. We have that area that had a swimming pool near the Burma like areas. We now have the Bengal regions. And then we also had that guy who was married to that Persian woman who they didn't like. Those are the diverse regions that they ruled. People like talking about the Moors, but what about these Abyssinians who ruled faraway lands at about the same time as the Moors, really, at least the tail end? Now, as kings and as Muslims, they would have been aware of the highest architecture of the day, which is why they built a bunch of mosques in the regions. And of course, we can look at them, but let's do that another time. But then we have the second thing, which is they would have traded. They would have traded with China, Japan, Korea, all these places. We have direct contact with these Abyssinians and faraway lands, exotic places, they themselves being exotic. This is the world before the Europeans came, the real world, the world that was diverse and accepted diversity. Now, I cannot blame the Muslims, to be honest, for removing the Abyssinians because they realized, yeah, you're dealing with some real smart folks here. You better go back to the weak people who will let you rule.